All right, thank you all again for being here. I'm super excited to launch, which is going to be our first session of the single serve design discussions we're going to be having with all kinds of different designers in different disciplines. And just to share a little bit of who I am in my heart, my name is Danae Dougherty. I'm the managing principal of Visioneering Studios. We are a national architecture and design firm with 4 offices around the U.S. About 5-6 months ago, I was asked to share a little bit on why design matters, and that's such a loaded question. You know, why does design matter? It just depends on who you ask. So for me, I really thought about it in a different way and reframed it a little bit to think about, like, why does responsible design matter and why does sustainable design matter? Because I really think that that is the question all of us as designers need to be asking ourselves. So for me, given humanity's propensity for consumption and the incredible amount of waste that comes with that, I feel like as a culture, we're embracing this kind of single serve culture, single serve design approach to life, where this yearning for low cost products that can be quickly and easily discarded and used that don't hold their value is really compromising the long-term kind of value and usability of products for a very short-term kind of gratification. And what it's doing is creating this abundance of waste and this abundance of this like quick design, get it out, you know, get it done quickly, and then it doesn't really hold its value for the long term. So over the course of the next few months, we're going to be doing sessions with several different designers working in different disciplines where they're going to be able to share with us kind of what their approaches to sustainable and responsible design within their media. And today I'm super excited to introduce Gage Mitchell, who is the principal and creative director at Modern Species. And I'm a super fangirl of theirs and the work they're doing. So this is just an incredible opportunity for me to be able to introduce him to everyone who's on the line watching. So Modern Species really specializes in branding, communicating others' brands, and they do it with a sustainable and responsible approach, both in their own practices, but also with the clients that they're working with, kind of actively selecting clients that really are in alignment with kind of their views on responsibility and sustainability. So with that said, I'd love to introduce Gage. He's joining us from Seattle, Washington at the Modern Species office. And I know that this time I could spend 3 hours talking to him, but we only have an hour. So we're going to try and condense this conversation into a very quick, pithy kind of back and forth. But to start off, Gage, I'd love for you have such an interesting story. I'd love for you to just share with the audience kind of what your personal and career journey has been that's led you towards this sustainable ethos within the company Modern Species.
Yeah, sure. Of course, that could be a multi-hour conversation as well, but I'll go with the short version and then you can ask for more detailed questions if I miss anything. So I've been in branding my whole career. I'm trained as a graphic designer, and I've been working in small design studios ever since. My history of working in the field has been in, like I said, small design studios, working at with whatever clients that design studio had, which was kind of a mixed bag. My most recent job previous to starting this company, though, we were working with residential developers, branding these giant multi-million-dollar housing communities, and it was our responsibility to try to sell these. And for me, that felt a little bit shallow or kind of unnecessary, and we were creating all these beautiful things to sell these giant homes and to help make developers who already had lots of money more rich, which to us, or at least to me at the studio, felt a little bit hollow. Whereas when I got to work on some of the more nonprofit cause-based work, I felt better about what I was doing. Just didn't really connect the dots super early in my career. But at one point in my career, I was and created this brand and look and feel and brochure and all these materials and signage for this new community bubbling up. And we went to the launch event where they just kind of pulled out all the stops, had all this food and music and like this tour of all these different mansions. And during that tour, I was sitting there stuffing my face with all the delicious food because I'm a big fan of food. But I saw one of the guests come in, grab one of the brochures I had spent a few months on, and meticulously specced all the right paper and all the right inks for that project. They picked it up, looked at it briefly, flipped through it. I'm assuming they were super impressed, but you know, who knows? I'm not putting that on them. But they looked at the brochure for a moment and then lowered it into the trash can and moved on with their tour instead of just putting it back on the table or keeping it with them during the rest of the tour or anything else. And it was that moment that I realized that essentially what a big part of what my job was at the time was designing pretty trash. And there was this discord inside me about what I thought my career could be and what it actually was at that moment. So my wife and I both decided to take a break from working. We quit our jobs, sold everything, and instead of spending money on a giant wedding, we just took that money and went and traveled in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia for a while. So during that trip, though, there's a couple important things that I learned that shaped Modern Species today, among many things, but to keep it brief. One of them was while we were in Europe, in Western Europe, in Belgium actually, we went to a pub that had over 2,000 different beers, and they had the correct logoed glass and coasters and all that for every single brewery, which as a craft beer fan was exciting for me. But the more important thing was when I was looking around that room and seeing all that gorgeous design, I realized that somebody out there actually got paid to do all that amazing design. And it was one of the first moments where I thought to myself that you don't have to just do whatever work somebody else tells you to do. You can go out and look for the type of work that you want to do and build a more meaningful career. And then another thing was a few times during our trips through Southeast Asia, we stumbled across just crazy pollution from all the tourists coming out there and just throwing water bottles in these pristine landscapes or at these historic monuments, or an occasion where we were walking through this pretty nice neighborhood in Cambodia and saw a kid dumping a bunch of trash into a hole in his front yard and burning it because they didn't have a waste management system. So seeing that and realizing that a lot of those things that he was throwing in that hole were things that were designed by someone like me, package designers, product designers, marketers, all these other kind of people. And if they had thought a little bit about the end of life scenario on those products, maybe they would have shipped a compostable package to Cambodia knowing that Cambodia doesn't have recycling or landfills. So there was that moment and a few other moments where we were talking to people on the streets who knew like everything about about the politics in the US at the time and who's up for election and what's going on with our economy, that I started to realize that in the US, we have a responsibility because we have all this privilege of infrastructure and all these other kind of things. We have this responsibility to use it more wisely because other cultures are looking to us as an example for where they might move forward as they develop their stronger middle class. And as designers or creatives that are making things and putting it out in the world, we have a responsibility to think whole systems, think about what materials we're using up front, think about how we're designing it, and think about what's going to happen after it leaves our hands or the consumer's hands or anything else. So when we got back to the United States, I started looking for design studios that did work that I cared about, like food and social cause and all these other kind of things, and did it in a responsible way. But it was the bottom of the economy when we got back. Nobody was hiring, couldn't really find anyone doing exactly what I was doing or wanted to do anyway. So I took some business classes and started Modern Species.
That's awesome. Now, there's something that you mentioned, and you had mentioned it before when we've talked, is this concept, which for me is super convicting as a designer, but also very poetic and profound, is that in a lot of cases, and this goes across disciplines, is we may be responsible for creating beautiful trash or pretty trash, things that may contribute to the consumption problem. And there's kind of this chicken and the egg issue of like, are we creating the market by, designing these types of products, or are we just responding to the needs of the market? So I'm curious to hear a little bit, like if you've had any thoughts on that, like the designer's role as, let's say, an innovator or someone who can think beyond like just the demands of the market to actually make a sustainable change or an environmental change? Or are we just kind of slaves to the behavior of our own humanity? Like, if you have any thoughts about kind of that, what comes first concept?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think the vast majority of creatives are essentially responding to whatever their boss or client is telling them to do, and they don't necessarily ask deeper questions or think about the bigger picture. They might think about this artifact that they're creating, but they're not thinking about the system that lives around that artifact. So whenever I'm talking to schools about how to practice more responsible, sustainable design, the main tip I can give them is to be curious. Because if you're curious, you'll ask questions. And if you ask questions, you'll find problems. And if you find problems, you can look for solutions. That solution might not always be the most sustainable, best thing that's ever invented, where butterflies and unicorns are gonna live freely on the planet, you know, but you can find something. Like, you can find little steps for improvement. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the idea that if I can't make this the most perfect, sustainable thing ever, or if the client doesn't tell me to do that, then I'm just going to stay in my lanes and I'm going to do what I can, or do what I'm told to do. However, I think we all have the power as creatives to influence our clients, to influence the projects that we're working on. We just need to actually go out and be curious, do some research on what that problem is, find some solutions that are, you know, get us part of the way there, all the way there, whatever we can do. And we need to present those options, but not just present them with our passion as a creative, because obviously we do have typically a lot of passion that we can harness, but present them in a way that would actually make sense to the client or to your boss, so that you can present it as a way to save money, or as a way to reduce energy costs in the future, or some other kind of method like that to get people to actually care about what you're proposing.
Yeah, I think a lot of times too, people, like, they don't, even on a small scale, in their own personal choices, it's hard sometimes to see like what the immediate impact is of just my own personal choice, because it feels so small. Or at least that's kind of what I've been thinking about over the last year. But if people start to understand that as you gather all these individual choices, they become quite large as more and more people embrace kind of a sustainable, responsible approach to not only their own personal decisions, but certainly creatives and innovators. You know, if you start to make incremental changes, then you can start to have a ripple effect on kind of the cultural or behavioral approach to design within the consumer market. So I think that that's really interesting. Is like, we can't solve every problem with one product, but you can start to help address the systemic issue of you know, people as a whole feeling like this incremental or my small contribution isn't enough. But if you start adding up all those incremental contributions, it actually makes a huge difference. Yeah. So I think that that's really interesting. So I'm just curious too, like, Modern Species, how do you guys kind of deploy sustainable, responsible measures within kind of the ethos of your own practice? But then also, how does that influence the types of clients you want to work with? And then how do you select the clients that you're going to work with?
Okay, a few parts to that question. So, so the first part was, how do we practice sustainability? So for us, we simplify it to the 3 E's, as I call them: environment, ethics, and economy. And that helps us just bucket it and remember to do little check-ins on each of those things when we're working on a product. So if we're working on a new package design, it's easy to understand different ways that that package design could influence the economics of our client. Like, how expensive is that? Is it going to be within the price point that they can get? Can you lower that price point? The economics of the end user, like, if we save money on packaging, can the price of the product come down? As well as economics of who you're hiring to help create that product. Like, where is this being manufactured? Are they being paid fair wages? Is this a local vendor that we're using, so more of that money stays local, etc. You can do that with environment and ethics as well. So each project that we're working on, we're probably not going to hit like 100% grade A scores on all 3 of those, but it gives us an opportunity to start those conversations and see where the lowest hanging fruit is first, what we can easily solve with a little effort, and then we can kind of scale it up from there depending on how much time or budget or anything else we have to work. So we use that general design thinking, or at least those general prompts, to inspire our design thinking and think more holistically about the work we're doing, instead of just, does this look cool? Is it going to sell something? Which are very important, and we have to ask those. But then we ask all those other questions, which I think is the main thing that differentiates us from other companies. And then you had another question, part of that question, which was, how do we?
Oh yeah, how do you guys? What's the process for how you decide who you're going to work with, and how do their goals align with maybe some of your own goals as a company?
Yeah, I'd like to say that we have like a formal checklist or application or something like that that has specific criteria, but we don't. Essentially, what our base criteria is that whoever we work with has to have some sort of greater purpose beyond just making money. So we end up working with a lot of for-profit, but for-benefit companies, as well as some nonprofit social impact companies as well. We currently focus a lot on the sustainable food and personal care sector, partly because we're just really passionate about that industry, because we love food samples when we get a new client, but also because if you look at the top 10 ways to reverse the effects or end or stop the effects of climate change, I think it was like 7 out of the top 10 all have to do with food, like how it's grown or how it's consumed or how we're wasting it or anything else like that. So for us, it's just a great opportunity to be able to make as big of impact as possible while also following our passion. And within that sector, like I said, we only want to work with the clients who have some sort of greater purpose, some greater goal, some sort of positive impact they're trying to create in the world, because that helps us get excited about the product and helps us get excited about the company and keeps us working our butt off for that client, because we know that all of our efforts are actually doing some good rather than putting more money in the pockets of very few people at the top of the organization.
Yeah. Have you ever had to politely decline an opportunity because there may have been a misalignment with kind of the goal of sustainability and responsibility?
Yeah, it's often, there's a lot of clients come to us with a social impact mission, but very few of them truly understand sustainability, especially when it comes to design, which a lot of people just immediately think, what does that mean? You just spec recycled paper and that's all. So it's, and a lot of people, even designers, don't really know that much about sustainable design. So it's rarer that a client will have to turn somebody down because they don't get the sustainability thing, because they don't really know enough about it to begin with, and that's our job as creatives to teach them along the way about making better choices. But there are, I don't want to say a ton because we do a pretty good job marketing ourselves, but there are definitely occasions where we get opportunities to work on projects through our network or just by people that found our work out in the wild and want to work with us, but they don't have any sort of mission. And if they are interested in that and they say, you know what, we don't have a mission right now, but we love the idea of it, maybe you can help us come up with that, we're totally fine working with them. But if they say, you know what, we don't have a mission, that's not what we're about, and it's not going to happen, but we like your design style, so could you work with us? Those are the times where we say no and just say thanks anyway, but we will refer you to some other people that we know that have good design style as well. But we like to keep our focus on companies that are making social impact, which can be a little bit of an awkward conversation if you're talking to maybe the founder. But often people get it. They're like, no, I totally understand. I wish we had an impact, but we don't. And so maybe even that little seed of conversation will go into their future planning, and maybe they will end up coming up with an impact. But at the moment, it just doesn't seem worth our time to work on that project.
But it just makes sense to hear you say that, because within the branding and marketing space, which is the area that you're operating in, if you're saying something or communicating something that the brand is not actually exhibiting, there's no conviction with it, then how solid is the brand to begin with? So if we're out, taking on this charge of we want to be about responsible design, sustainable design, and making impact, nationally and globally within that sphere, but then our clients aren't on board, the clientele is like not on board with that, or it's just the approach is we just do recycled paper and that's how we're becoming sustainable and responsible. Do you think that's that doesn't seem like in alignment with kind of the brand promise that you guys are? are
And I
out
think
kind of champion. So
I've seen more and more creative agencies start to take on more positive impact, sustainable work. However, I think the traditional approach to it is very dip a toe in the water kind of method, where they want their team is demanding that they want to work on more meaningful work, or the industry is going that way and they want to plant their flag in the ground and say, yes, we do impact work as well. But they're just really afraid to turn away their clients that don't have any sort of mission or impact. So they just like create a separate division that works on social impact or sustainability stuff, or they just do like one sustainable project a year and put that up on their website and say we're a sustainable studio. But for me, to your point, that feels inauthentic. Like if you actually care about sustainability, why don't you make that your full-time practice? Or if you actually care about social impact, why are you working with a company that's just damaging the world and the people that it touches? Like, it doesn't really make any sense. Yes, you need to pay your bills, and yes, you need to be responsible about, whether or not you're able to keep your employees paid, but either do it and do it with your full heart, or just admit that you don't really care that much and continue on with your regular practice.
Yeah. So are there any design disciplines that you look to for kind of inspiration or influence that you feel like have kind of led this conversation within the design world? And who do you look to as an innovator, an influencer within that space?
Yeah. So I think the creative professions that have had the most time in sustainability would be architecture and product design, because they're creating these physical things that last a long time. So you have to think about the materials you're using and how it's going to interact with the land or interact with the landfill or anything else like that. So those industries have a big jump on more intangible or temporary design services like communication design or branding or something that feels like it's more digital, like there's less physical materials or mining that's involved in creating that. So often when we're looking for inspiration in terms of like biomimicry or new use of material or energy saving, we like to look towards architecture and product design. In terms of social impact, I think service design is a field that doesn't get talked a lot about, but that I think impacts, or that's a big inspiration for us, and that the service design companies aren't just creating a brochure or creating a building or whatever, but they're creating a system for engaging with people towards some sort of goal, whether that be education, whether it be better healthcare or anything else like that. So we also get really inspired by those service design professionals and the really interesting things they're doing to better their community. I think that's a direction that we'd like to explore more, because right now we're pretty deep in the branding and package design world, but we'd like to do more of that pure, just really good social impact work and add a sustainability lens to it, because I think a lot of people doing social impact forget to do it sustainably.
Awesome. Okay, I have a couple more questions, and one is related to kind of, you brought this up earlier, but there's an infrastructure issue within certain kind of countries where, there may be the desire to provide sustainable products and things of that nature within certain ecosystems, but the actual ability to recycle or reuse within the context of that location, there's just not that system in place yet. So there's almost in line with what you kind of said earlier, where there's kind of almost a superficial like approach to, oh, we've made all these plastic bottles and they're all recyclable, but when you ship millions of them to a certain country that doesn't have the infrastructure to actually recycle them, then that doesn't actually work. So I'm curious about kind of the infrastructure question related to sustainability and responsibility related to packaging. And then also the last question I think I'm going to ask, because it's kind of a big one, is what do you think kind of, how do you think, if you could solve one major infrastructure issue or system issue within kind of the sustainable, responsible realm, like what do you think it would be? Like if you could overnight fix one big problem related to sustainability, responsibility, infrastructure issues, whatever it looks like, what do you think that would be?
Okay. So for the infrastructure question, you were mentioning that I had discussed infrastructure issues in some countries where they don't have a waste recovery system. And that is incredibly true. However, maybe to make it more here and now, I would also say that here in the United States, while we have a pretty robust waste management system, it's actually different from state to state. And in some states, for example, here in Seattle, Washington, I think we recycle more than we throw away. And we have a pretty robust compost program because it's mandatory in office buildings and apartment buildings, right? So there's infrastructure there that we take advantage of. However, I've also lived in other states like Charlotte, North Carolina, where at the time there was barely any recycling going on because it was impossible to find a recycling container, even if you're a business or anything. And then there's composting. I think they just, like 10 years after I lived there, they just started experimenting with composting. So trying to be a national producer of a consumer packaged good, like a food product, and creating sustainable packaging can be really difficult because it depends on where you're shipping that product to and whether it actually is actually sustainable or whether it's just in theory sustainable. And so we can look at other countries' infrastructure for sure, and that's a whole nother conversation. But even right here, there are some major problems in terms of how we're recovering materials, what happens to those materials when we do recover them. Let's just say plastic recycling. There's all these different numbers of plastic. Is it really that necessary for us to have that many different numbers, which makes it difficult to recover and recycle? And then eliminate that question and just say like number one plastic. Once we gather up all this number one plastic, what's happening to that? Are we able to efficiently gather it all up in waste streams or people throwing it in the trash can, or does it end up floating in the ocean? Those are another, other problems. Well, let's just say we gathered it all up, it went to the recycling plant. Once you get to that recycling plant, there's certain inefficiencies in their system. They'll catch most of the number one plastic, sure, but some of it might not have been cleaned by the consumer, and therefore they have to throw it in the landfill. Some of it might be contaminated with colored plastic, and therefore it would downcycle the material. So there's all these different things to consider there, and then once they gather it up, it's got to get shipped to another country to be recycled into something else and shipped back to the United States. So there's infrastructure problems right here at home where if we, I guess to tie into the second part of your question there, what would I fix? So as a company that focuses a lot on package design, I would say if I could make our infrastructure in the United States to recover and recycle materials to keep them in the material stream, we would have huge impact on sustainability, because that way we're not sending a ton of really useful materials into the landfill. We're not sending materials that should not be in a landfill, like biodegradable materials, into the landfill. And we'll actually be collecting enough of this stuff that we consume to where we have to import less plastic or less virgin trees or anything else like that. So if we could close the loop, so to speak, on our material stream, I think we would make giant leaps in terms of sustainability as a country.
Yeah, that's awesome. I totally agree. And I also, the last kind of, the unknown is always like human behavior. How easy can you make it for somebody to participate to where they won't choose not to? And I think as a designer, that's always the unknown is we're operating in theory somewhat. There's some approaches that are tested, like we know this has worked because we've done it for 15 years, like in architecture. We know certain ways to approach how to get into and out of a building just happen to work. But there's still an unpredictability to human behavior that's always the wild card. So my thought has always been like, you have to make it so easy that they would always choose that way to do it rather than defaulting back into like the way we've always done it. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit about kind of your thoughts on just human behavior and interaction with design as that kind of wild card piece. So
yeah, your instincts are correct according to my knowledge of behavior design, which I was lucky enough to attend a behavior design boot camp taught by a Stanford professor, BJ Fogg, who's been working in the field of behavior design for like 20 plus years, and he's created a nice simple formula for designing things for human behavior. But the the broken down version of it is exactly what you said. If you don't have all of the other data to come up with like a really complex solution, pretty much always just assume that if you make it easier, you'll get better results on your behavior target goals. So there's, I think a lot of people think towards motivation, and that's often wrong. So they think, oh, we need to get more people to recycle. How do we motivate them to actually do that? And the problem is, if it's difficult to recycle, like it's difficult to sort through all this and you don't really know what to do and what to put where, you're just not going to put the effort into it. You're either going to not recycle at all, or you're going to put all the wrong stuff in the recycling and maybe cause more harm than good, right? So motivation isn't the goal that we should shoot for, because motivation is fickle. It'll come and go depending on how tired or hungry you are, and you can't count on that type of motivation working for everybody. But if you make things easier, so as like a package designer, if we can make it really clear what you're supposed to do with that package and help specify materials that activity that you need to do with that package works in all 50 states or wherever this product is sold, then we have created a system that will boost the actual recovery of materials, because consumers will actually participate in that process. Because without all that, I've seen some companies create some really amazing, innovative, sustainable packaging, but they forgot about that consumer part. They forgot that they would need to really clearly tell people to separate the paper pulp from the inner plastic pouch. And now all of their sustainability efforts went down the drain because all of those packages went in the landfill, because nobody separated it before it went to the recovery center, and all the recovery center employees had to take it out of the stream and put it in the landfill. So great intentions, they just forgot about the human behavior part, which is, I think, one of the biggest opportunities we all as sustainable creatives have, is while these infrastructure pieces are catching up, what can we do in the here and now with what we're already putting out into the world? How can we make sure that people are participating in the process of sustainability? And yes, your hunch is 100% correct. The easier and clearer we can make it for them, the better. And once they start doing it, then it'll be easier for them to be motivated to continue doing it, because now they have confidence in that action.
Yeah. And for us, it's always our approach with our clients is that we want to champion them, and we want them to become the experts within a space that they may have otherwise been very intimidated by. So if we can, through design and making it super simple for people to understand how to recycle, how to reuse, then you make them an expert within that space, and I believe, will be more inspired and motivated to continue to operate within that space. But if you make it too hard, too complicated, to where they don't feel like they understand what they're supposed to do, then it's just so easy to fall back into the mode of, I'll just keep doing what I'm comfortable with and what I know how to do. So yeah. I love that approach and the thought process there. So
yeah, one quick example of that, and we'll jump to the Q&A, but just what you described right there made me think of, there's a building here in Seattle that's the first living building, I think, in the country. And talking about human behavior, they created some really smart systems in there. So the building regulates its temperature, for example, by having the blinds that kind of come and cover the windows on autopilot, so that as the sun comes out, the blinds come down. If you had relied on humans to do that, say, oh, when it starts getting toasty in here, go and roll the blinds down to this degree and pay attention to like what time of year it is and do all this other kind of complex math, then it wouldn't have worked as well. But the fact that they made it as easy as possible, made it programmable, made the building do it themselves, made all these people able to help that building become more sustainable. So architecture has an awesome opportunity to do all sorts of great things to influence behavior.
Yeah. So I think it is time. I'm getting the signal that we're going to go to Q&A. So I am going to start looking through and seeing which questions we want to start with.
I'll ask. So first question, what is the main difference between a normal versus sustainable business model for a creative firm?
Do you want to kind of talk through Modern Species' approach to sustainability related to your ethos?
Yeah, so I would say we'll start with the normal. For a creative services firm, typically you're hopefully working within some sort of sector, but you're essentially doing services for anybody within that sector and doing them with the main goal in theory of either, depending on what kind of firm you are, either making it incredibly functional or incredibly beautiful. Like those are the things that most creative studios focus on. Possibly also really innovative if you're that type of firm that likes to push the industry forward. But what's missing from that is the more systems thinking sustainability aspect. So for us internally at Modern Species, we have two different sides of that. We have got how do we operate our business ethically and sustainably? How do we give back? How do we treat our employees well? Like for us, for example, we're financially transparent. Everybody knows what everybody makes and how much money the company is bringing in, and we all participate in deciding who we give money to charities each year, and everyone gets kind of a say in what clients we bring on and don't bring on and the type of work we pursue. So there's all sorts of things that we do internally in terms of sourcing, sourcing locally sustainable materials, etc. But then I think that's like how you operate a business sustainably. But then how do you take that to the next level and focus on how you work with those kind of ethos in the client world? So for us, it can be about choosing who you work with, the type of people that are already have some sort of social impact or positive impact goals, and then also the work you're doing for the clients. Are you guiding them to be a more sustainable company, more sustainable brand by helping them make the more responsible choices? And since we work with a lot of sustainable brands, it only makes sense for us to help them live that brand fully by being sustainable in all their touch points. So there's a few different methods. I think some studios just focus on the let's do sustainable work method, and some just focus on the let's operate sustainably. But I think the best scenario, of course, maybe it's just because we do that, but I think the best scenario is like holistically, you do sustainable work and you operate sustainably.
Yeah, well, I believe greatest partnerships between clients and creatives is going to be when there's some alignment. Their missions may be slightly different, but there's some overlap in alignment in what the goals are, so that you're understanding what the goals that each are trying to achieve, and it just makes for a really exciting partnership rather than kind of constantly butting heads with the people you're trying to work with and design for. So I know at Visioneering, we primarily work in the nonprofit space. So many of our clients, their mission is very much in alignment with our own company mission goals. So that's kind of for us. And similar to what you're saying, the approach to responsible, sustainable design for us, it's twofold. It's not just how we operate, it's also that our mission is in alignment with the mission of the clients that we're serving. And then additionally, we like to consider ourselves stewards of resources, not just our own, but also the client's resources. So whether that's their mission, vision, values, and also their economic resources, all of those things we're looking at as we approach projects. So that's kind of, it's more of a holistic approach, as you're saying, rather than do we have recycling bins in our break room and that means we're sustainable. It's just a different kind of deeper level approach to the concept of sustainability. So we do have another question, and it's kind of in line with what we just started to talk about. What is the greatest challenge you are facing in staying on mission?
Okay. I would say that the greatest challenge is back to some of our conversations earlier, the infrastructure or material availability for the type of things that we want to work on. For example, we would love it if all of our clients had 100% sustainable packaging, but at the moment, there is no such thing as 100% sustainable packaging because everything takes some amount of resources, energy, and there's going to be some sort of compromise in terms of what happens to that into life or whatever else. So that hinders us in terms of executing more like regenerative, fully sustainable solutions for our clients. But we do keep pushing forward, pushing the industry and ourselves forward to get better along the way. But until it's possible to make something 100% sustainable, I'd say that's one of the barriers, is just what is possible. And then I would say another barrier is just when focusing a lot on the social cause work, you're not chasing these multi-million-dollar Coca-Cola contracts or something like that. So you have to be smarter about your own resources and how you're going to work with these amazing clients and give them really high-end product with typically a smaller budget. Not always, because there are some big companies that are focusing on sustainability as well. But for us, the types of companies we really enjoy working with are on the smaller scale, like trying to, you know, fight the man and create a new innovative way of doing business. And often that comes with smaller budgets for us to work within and to execute our designs, and maybe also smaller fees towards us. So for us, staying small and nimble is the way we approach that. Instead of trying to grow into a 300-person agency, we just keep it small so that we can focus on our mission. I think over time that will change, and with more and more big companies coming into the social responsibility and sustainability world, I think even the bigger agencies will be able to focus on it more wholly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think even in the space of architecture, while there's been some incredible improvements and leaps that have been made, at the end of the day, there's still a physical material resource that's required to construct a space or a building. And the actual recyclability of most of those products, while much better than it used to be, there's still, at the end of its life, there's not a great disposal system for what do you do with it after the fact. So in some ways, there is a lot of recycling that happens, but there's still a lot of product that ends up in landfills because there just isn't a great disposal system yet. However, we are talking in the space of, you know, buildings are going up and they're staying up 20, 30, 50, 100 years. So the life cycle before it goes to landfill might be longer, but it's such an incredible amount of volume compared, you know, like packages, the sheer volume of it, even though it may be more years before it's realized in the landfill, it's just an incredible amount of volume. So I would concur with you. I think that might be the challenge of a lot of designers across different disciplines, that just the actual raw materials that we're using, there's still a need to work within the physical space and physical materials, and there's still challenges with, you know, how they're made, how they get turned into a product, and what happens to them after. So, okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to probably need to wrap up. So, let's see. I'm trying to pick which one. Okay, I'm going to do two more because I actually think that this one might be quick, but we'll see. What is the story behind the name Modern Species?
Okay, nice, yeah.
Is that a quick one, or is that?
Yeah, pretty quick.
Okay.
So we chose Modern Species as our name because twofold. We help companies evolve to be the more sustainable version of themselves, more sustainable, responsible version, which we feel like is the evolution of where business is heading. So we help them keep up with times and innovate. And then also for us, it's because we have an internal company culture, internal drive for self-improvement, which means constant evolving of our own knowledge, of our own practices and everything else. So Modern Species to us means that you're constantly evolving and changing to adapt to an ever-changing business and environmental landscape that we have to be more responsible in.
Awesome. Okay, so this one actually might be a little bit longer, but I think it's a really important one to address too, because the goal, I think, would be for us as designers, we want to inspire other people to action, or at least I would want to. And so this question is actually a good one. What is the best tactic to use when educating clients without preaching to them so they don't push back and say, I just want you to do what we hired you to do?
Yeah, so for me, I think it goes back to the behavior design question we were having before. Whenever, and there's also a good book that's kind of helps you figure out how to pitch things to different people, but How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was written a long time ago, but and it's a lot of it's common sense, but it still is very relevant today. But with behavior design, you have to try to figure out what people's internal motivations are, and then give them a trigger or your pitch or whatever that aligns with those motivations and make the solution that you want them to choose as easy as possible, right? So with that same thinking, if you think about what your client cares about, so you might be working with a nonprofit who's, for them, like saving money is the bottom line, in which case if you want to influence their behavior towards more sustainable architecture, more sustainable packaging or whatever else, then you approach it to them in terms of how this will save them more money in the long run. And if you can do that and make the option really easy, like A-B choice, not like A through Z choices, it's going to confuse them, then they are much more likely to actually choose the outcome that you're proposing to them, the more sustainable outcome. If you have a client who cares more about how this will impact sales, then you can bring them data showing that the millennial consumer cares as much about what the product represents or what that brand represents as they do about the quality of the product. So if you align your company story, your brand with your mission, and put that out there and pay the extra couple cents per package to use the recycled paper or the whatever we're discussing at that moment, then it'll resonate more with this consumer that you're targeting. And then you give them an easy option, and hopefully they'll choose the right path. I also typically, we learned early on that if at all possible, if there are sustainable options, we usually just don't even show the non-sustainable option. Like we'll show a couple different versions of sustainability, like sustainability light or sustainability hardcore. So at the very least, even if they're picking the bottom rung because of price or time or whatever else, then you're still at least pushing them a little bit forward.
Awesome. All right, I think we do have time for one more. So have you actually had a chance to be part of or work with any people in developing nations related to recycling, sustainability? Have you had any interaction outside of the U.S. related to these types of measures?
I haven't had the opportunity outside the U.S. yet, but that's something I'd love the opportunity to. So if anybody's listening, let's chat.
Awesome. Well, okay, just personally, I'm curious to hear from you as to, for any people kind of listening or coming up that are interested in getting into the branding, marketing, kind of graphic design space, and they're particularly interested in sustainable and responsible design in that space. Do you have any thoughts or advice for them, like as a newer designer entering that field, kind of what type of track they might want to be on related to their career, or things to read, or just any resources that you would want to share that could help them get into that space?
Yeah, so I'd start with the previous tip that I had, which I give to all people trying to enter into this world, which is start by being curious, because if you ask questions, again, you'll find a problem, and if you find the problems, you can find potential solutions. So just be curious enough in whatever job you're doing right now or even if it's in school, just be curious enough to ask, well, where are these materials coming from, or how is this being manufactured, or what's going to happen to this after the consumer's done with it, or whatever field you're in. Just be curious enough to start asking those questions. And then, yes, there are tons of books, depending on whichever field you're trying to get into. There are lots of books on sustainable graphic design, sustainable branding, just sustainable, like responsible service-based design practices. There's tons of learning out there, from blogs to videos to books. So if you're curious and you start asking those questions, you'll hopefully get curious enough to read some books, and then ask questions of your vendors, ask questions of your client. Just dig in deeper for more information, because the more you find out, the easier it will be to create a solution that fits into that system.
Awesome. Okay, and now the question I've been burning all hour trying to ask you: what's your favorite craft beer?
Oh. Yeah.
If you can narrow it down to one.
Yeah, there's I'm on a sour kick lately, sour beers. So I think because they're a little bit harder to find in most areas, but it's starting to become more popular. But for a long time, it was really difficult to find. And when I was living in Wisconsin, there's a brewery called New Glarus that for a short period of time made I can't remember the actual name they called it, but it was a sour brown ale. And it for some reason didn't perform super well, but I just loved it so much. It was just this combination of malt and tangy sourness that was just really refreshing, but also kind of like hearty enough to be satisfying. So when I found out that, or when I went down to their brewery to go on a tour, I saw that they had a few cases of that left in their store. So I bought as much as I could and took it home and just like kept that, you know, just drank one of those every couple months or something as a nice little treat. So I guess I would say that New Glarus Sour Brown Ale. But I like all different types of beers, just interesting beer. Like I just had a pumpkin habanero beer from New Belgium Brewing just last night that was really tasty as well. There's also a beer from New Belgium. Again, I grew up in Colorado, so I got a lot of New Belgium in me. But there's one called Coca Mole that's just maybe the best beer I think they've ever brewed. That's a kind of a chocolate, spicy chocolate. I can't even remember what the base was, just ale or something, but it was really delicious.
Awesome. Well, Gage, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm such a fan of what you guys are doing. And is there any way, aside from, is the website the best way to follow you guys or get in contact with you? Do you have any kind of Twitter or social media outlets that if any of our listeners, viewers want to be able to follow you guys and see more about the work you're doing, that they can reach you at?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram and Twitter at modspec, at MODSPEC, and we're on Facebook at Modern Species. We're also on LinkedIn. We have a blog on our website at modernspecies.com where we have a huge archive of articles on sustainability and social impact and branding and packaging and all sorts of stuff. So there's lots of places to dig in there, and feel free to always reach out. Of course, you can email us at modernspecies.com and ask us any questions you have. We're always happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And for all of you guys still listening, just an update on kind of where we're going with single-serve design. We're going to be doing a series of talks with other designers working in other disciplines across the design sphere next month. Actually not the same day, we're going to meet on September 28th at 10 a.m. and we're going to be talking all things fashion. So if you are interested in knowing what's going on in the world of fast fashion and also the systemic issues in the fashion industry related to responsibility and sustainability, please join us. You can follow us at the Single Serve Design website. You can also follow us on Visioneering Studios for more information related to that next chat. Additionally, beyond that, we're going to be doing 2 other talks as part of this series, so stay tuned to hear more about what those topics are going to be. Each one, though, will be unique in that we'll be talking to a designer working within a specific discipline and how they're an influencer within that space related to responsible design, sustainability, and impacting the community around them through their work. So we really appreciate you guys being here. Looking forward to talking more and hope you can join us next time. Thanks so much.